weird. Okay, Mr. Greg.
Yes, Mr. Gray.
We are in Brisbane in 2012. Method.
Mm-hmm. Your new book?
It is a book.
Not that new though. It's been out for...
It's come out now. It's been out for 9 months because it was launched in Delhi at the Liga conference in 2011. That was fun actually. Quick story.
Yeah.
I got a text. I was at Mumbai airport, and I got a text from the organisers of B. Jane, who were doing the details around the launch. And I got a text from Geeta, and it said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Mumbai." She said, "But the launch is starting soon."
Oh.
I went, "What do you mean?" And she went, "Didn't I tell you?"
Oh no.
And what they'd done is they'd sprung it. Actually, it wasn't her at all. They'd sprung a book launch at the beginning of the Liga conference with the Indian Minister of Health. You know, responsible for I don't know, 1 billion people.
Yep.
And their health. And so she said, "Oh look, there's going to be some ceremonies first, but just do your best," because I was flying in. So I got on the plane in Mumbai, flew to Delhi, got off the plane at Delhi, never been to Delhi, got a cab, texted her and said, "What's happening?" She said, "The opening ceremonies are still happening. It's India. It's great. You know, speeches and music and all the rest of it." And then, so I thought, well, why not? So I got into my suit in the back of the taxi and drove all the way through Delhi, got to the venue, ran into the venue carrying my bag, went into the main conference hall just as they handed my book to the Indian Minister of Health, and I walked down the stairs on the stage, shook his hand, and then walked off. It was just perfect. Anyway, so why am I telling you that story? Anyway, book. So it's been out for a while, and some nice comments about it, because to my mind, well, I don't know, love your opinion, but to my mind, from teaching students of homeopathy for 10, 15 years now, they don't get it. They don't get the clearly different styles or methods of homeopathic prescribing. And there was so little literature on what seems to me to be a stunningly important subject.
I think we've got not just students, I think practitioners, teachers.
Yep.
We as an industry, I don't think we're as broadly aware of the differences of where we've come from and how those things fit together as we could be.
Yeah, right. Well, firstly, I think as a profession, what we do is we latch onto our teachers and we do what our teachers did. But, in my situation, I did exactly the same. I loved the education I've got in homeopathy, but it took years of practice to work out that what I'd learned was an amazing style or method of homeopathy. And, I didn't learn, say, in my situation, I didn't learn any therapeutics. I didn't learn any specifics. I didn't learn anything really so much about Berningshausen method. And that has been of real value to me over the years in my practice. So, and then in our work, we see students in clinics doing the most amazing things as they get their feet or find their feet with homeopathy and mixing styles or mixing methods, mixing case-taking methods as well, and quite often getting it right or often, not getting it, skew.
Yeah, sometimes conscious mixing and sometimes surprise accidental mixing.
Yeah, well, exactly. Even we've talked about it before. mixing repertories using a rubric out of this one and a rubric.
We had that argument.
And of course, it's nonsense. And
no, it's a highly useful and sometimes really important case analysis technique.
But one of the things that really gets me is that homeopathy is there's not only styles of prescribing that are individual, but they're cultural as well. And my travels around the world have clearly demonstrated to me that cultural interpretations of the organon of homeopathy are as important as dominant teachers. You could say that, Kent, clearly, the old American bloke, but his teaching and his method dominated homeopathy for more than 100 years, and there are still very strong enclaves of his style of prescribing in Malaysia, in India, for sure, as well as well, and the UK. Ironically, you know, it got imported back to the UK as well.
Yeah.
But really getting a feel for and understanding the philosophy and the history, I think knowing where we've come from is so crucial to understand where we're at now. And where we're at now in homeopathy is that we've got a few problems, I think, as a profession, and knowing where we've come from will assist us in getting good clinical outcomes, better clinical outcomes, and assist us in being able to articulate those to the public that I think looks at us sometimes and is a bit bewildered by who we are and what we do and what we stand for. Don't you think?
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny if you look amongst our profession, we've got, you know, different people sometimes saying the same thing with very different language.
Yep.
Sometimes saying the same language and meaning something very different than each other.
Oh, totally. I mean, you know, for example, one of the chapters that I wrote in that book, and we'll talk about in the webinar series, is about constitution, because never has there been a more misused word ever.
Well, there's that miasm word, it comes close.
Well, I think, folks, when it comes to method, I mean, people are pretty clear on, say, what is miasmatic prescribing. I got you, for example. Do you think people have different interpretations of miasmatic prescribing?
Yeah, I don't know if people have different interpretations of SORA and psychosis and
oh my god, totally, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yes. What is a miasm and how do we use that theory of chronic disease? Absolutely, yeah. But I suppose as a style of prescribing, the interventions are pretty simple. I mean, if you identify that the case is, say, heavily psychotic, then you've got a couple of treatment options.
Yeah,
you know, really
depends on whose list of psychotic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you know, that's important to talk about as well.
Yeah.
So
but constitution is another one. Constitution.
Oh.
There's not two homeopaths who mean the same thing when they say constitutional homeopath.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some great literature on that. David Little, for example, I think nails it just completely with all of his literature that's available on the internet. But it's a word that's been shockingly misused. And for the last 100 years in homeopathy. Even patients ring up and say, you know, I want a constitutional remedy, or are you a constitutional prescriber? What does that mean? So yeah, and in this webinar series, looking at essentially Hahnemannian prescribing and really, you know, what is it, and the use of the complete symptom well, as opposed to looking at a much broader perspective of the patient, which we can describe, or I describe as more a Kantian style. So it really comes down to a different interpretation of what Hahnemann meant. And the classification that I use, that I'm still really quite comfortable with, is that all of the different schools in homeopathy, the different styles of prescribing, come down to a different interpretation of totality of symptoms. And Schulzen's work that you wrote about, Sankaran's work, the work of the keynote prescribers, the isopaths, the tautopaths, the folks that even use combination remedies. You know, ultimately, what we have in common is a lot, but our differences and our point of difference comes down to the prescriber identifying a different totality of characteristic symptoms of the disease, or the patient in the case. And that really defines the different schools. Easiaga, layers, drainage, all of the different things that we know and use, well, some of us use at times. So that's kind of what it's about. Okay. So any other thoughts on method or methodology that you have from your observations of teaching a lot of students?
Oh, that's a broad question. The thing that my obsession with methodology is that there are so many of them, and we get into this debate in homeopathy, which is the best method to use, or what's the method that suits me as a practitioner. I like to flip that around and try to think what's the method that suits the patient sitting in front of me.
Fantastic.
And I think that's where something like method is really helpful, because it gives you a contextual tour of all the different methods you can work at. What is the tool that I could reach for, rather than just saying what's the repertoire I'm going to reach for, but what is actually the methodology, the philosophy that's going to work best with the person sitting in front of me. So
identifying, individualising that patient, but also then maximising the method to that situation. It's beautiful. It's a good way of thinking. I mean, another metaphor, it's probably a terrible metaphor in the context of natural medicine, but when I look at other disciplines that have spread around the world in the way that perhaps we have, the two obvious ones are Buddhism or in fact probably Christianity actually, because as those disciplines moved around different places, they adopted or morphed into the environments, the pre-existing environments in which they were in. And the other one is football. It's exactly the same. Right? Terrible analogy, isn't it? Usually for classrooms are homeopaths. But, you know, the Brazilians play football differently to the Germans.
Yeah.
You know, and football, it was started in one place and it moved.
Well, there's
just as
strange
homeopathy.
people in Europe, they play it with a round ball.
Yeah. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's funny. Anyway, so that's it. You know, a bit of background to the book and to the webinar series coming up.
Starting shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of weeks. Cool. Thanks.
Okay,
All right. See ya.